Okay, if you could all take your seats, that would be great. I hope you had time to grab a coffee. We are now going into the second panel session of the morning, and this one is on a topic that I know all of you will be, I think we've got the wrong slide up there, but that I know all of you will be very, very interested in. It comes up in almost everything that we do now with Global Government Forum, all our webinars, all of our events as well. So this session is all about applying AI in the UK government, how to make it happen. And I think we're going to be looking at the progress that has been made across governments, and we're also going to be learning from some good practice from other countries as well, and from our colleagues in the private sector. We have a fantastic panel with us here. I'm going to follow the same format that I followed in the last session. If you weren't here and didn't manage to get into the room for the first session, I am going to introduce our speakers very, very quickly. I am going to put 1 or 2 questions to each of our speakers, but then we want most of this session to be a conversation with you. We have a great audience here. We had lots of questions in our first panel. I'd like to keep that energy and engagement up for this session. So it's just a heads up to all of you that once we have had a bit of a conversation here, I'm going to be throwing it open to all of you for your questions. And please do use this opportunity to put any questions and comments that you have to our great panel. So in terms of who we have with us here today, I'm delighted that we are joined by Susan Ackland-Hood, who is Permanent Secretary in the Department for Education here in the UK. Then we have Stephen Burt, who is Chief Data Officer of Canada, so has come all the way from Canada and sits in the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat. And Stephen is a great friend of a lot of these events. And we will be handing over, I think, the baton of our events to you later at some point over the next 2 days. Then we have David Knott, who is the Chief Technology Officer for the UK Government in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. We have Morgan Rees, who is Vice President of Data Analytics and AI at Capgemini Invent. And then last but by no means least, we've got Ed Kendall, who is Director of Advanced Analysis, Data and Analytics at NHS England. So obviously a lot been going on in your area, Ed, and we might come on to some of that as well. So I'm going to kick off with a couple of questions, as I said. So the first very obvious question that I'm going to put to you, Susan, given the topic of this, is how is AI currently being deployed in your department, and what impact is it having?
Thanks very much indeed. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here and really good to see you all. We think about technology in 3 ways in the Department for Education. We're thinking about how we can use it in the department itself to make our work more efficient. And we've rolled out tools for all our colleagues, and we've also got some specialist use cases. Second, we think about how we're deploying technology across the wider education landscape, including in the school system. And for that, we really try and start with purpose. So we want to deploy technology, but we really want to think about pedagogy and learning and what that means for children's brain development, and how we are using the principles that we use across the rest of the education system, which is to try to be as evidence-based as possible to make sure we're understanding what works. We launched the Education Content Store last August, which is essentially a high-quality resource for building great AI tools using well-respected and protected education content. And we're developing a set of innovative products that use the content store. And there's a combination of work we're doing in-house and work that we're encouraging a kind of development ecosystem around. And the core is based on good quality content and with the infrastructure to evaluate and understand what's working. And I've got a very short video I just thought I'd play while I speak, which shows a couple of the things we're doing. This is Ayla, which is our online AI lesson planning tool for teachers. It's based on the content in the Oak National Academy, so it's based on really good quality, well-researched lesson plans. It puts the teacher in charge. They drive and they use their professional expertise, but it massively reduces the time taken to do things like plan lessons. It will write opening quizzes for the lessons. It will produce resources, and it does it, as you can see, quite quickly. We have about 30,000 teachers signed up to use Ayla, and it saves about 3 hours a week.
Fantastic.
And we've used, through the Education Endowment Foundation, we've tested impact on quality of using tools like ChatGPT and Copilot to plan lessons and seen that it doesn't diminish the quality if used well. This one here is one of the prototype tools that we're using developed off the content store. And the really powerful thing about this one is this is about giving really high quality feedback to students based on written work. And critically, this one doesn't require the child to work on a screen. So one of the challenges of working in EdTech is we know some things work really well when children work on screens, but we also know there are some tools where the kind of physical act of writing, for example, for the child is really important in helping that go into the developing the physical skills and also the long-term memory. So Stylus is a tool that provides AI-generated, really high-quality, long-run written feedback, but where the child can write on paper, and we use scanning to generate the feedback. So just a couple of examples.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is thinking about how we're generating skills in children and adults for the digital and AI revolution. And that involves looking through our curriculum and assessment review, but also looking at skills development closer to deployment for adults in the labour market.
Fantastic. So we might come back to that last point you made there about kind of the next generation and are we training the future generations in AI. And really interesting what you said there about how teachers are starting to use some of the tools that you're developing, because I guess teachers in some ways, their pupils are going to be using AI, right? They're the younger people, they're going to be using AI quite a bit. So it's important that the teachers understand this technology as well and some of the opportunities that it has. I'm sure that's piqued the interest, and I've got lots of questions already. So please, if you've got questions, hold your questions and we'll come back to those in a moment. But Stephen, I want to come over to you and similarly, any examples you can give, that would be great, of where AI is already kind of being deployed across the Canadian federal government. But you've also recently published an AI strategy, haven't you? So can you just give us a sense of why you've done that, what's in it, what it covers?
For sure. Thanks, Siobhan. So yeah, we pushed out AI strategy specific to the public service in the beginning of March. I had a bit of an announcement around that. And the impetus for us on that as a central agency of government was that we were seeing pockets of activity across departments and agencies, some of them developing tools almost as great and innovative as the one you just showed us, which is phenomenal, but it was very uneven. And what we were finding was that despite the fact that we'd put out a number of sort of policies and guidance around how to use it, there was sort of a persistent mythology and risk aversion in departments and agencies about are we able to, or how come, when will we be able to? Like there's a sense that somehow they were being held back from doing it, which I think was really a cultural issue in terms of a certain sense of risk aversion in the public sector. So the point of the strategy is really to encourage federal departments and agencies to drive forward and to put down some markers, particularly with some what we're calling lighthouse projects that we really want to push forward as good examples of the kinds of things that can be done. The one that's profiled most significantly in the AI strategy right now is one for translation tools specific to government. As many of you may know, Canada has 2 official languages. Everything has to be done in both. There's been a proliferation of private sector online tools to do translation, which is quite good. But we, as a country that's been in the translation business for more than a century now, we actually already have a great database on Canadian English, Canadian French, and usages and equivalencies and whatnot. So we wanted to make sure that the problem with the online tools was that we weren't capturing that data set anymore. It was being scooped up by these private sector companies. So putting a tool out that's as easy to use and as simple, but that can also be used for official documents and can be used with proper, built on this database of sort of proper usage in Canadian English and French was really important to us. So that's one. There are many other examples of things that are happening in government. I would say they fall into sort of 2, maybe 3 major buckets. One being classic sort of machine learning inside systems. Our immigration department's a leader in that, where they've about 17 million standard immigration transactions have been automated, so they can focus the people, their human resources on the more complex cases. Similarly, Transport Canada has a cargo program where using AI, they've managed to process 10 times as many cases per day, which is an impressive statistic. But what's more meaningful, I think, is that they've gone from doing risk analysis of 6% of air cargo to doing 100%,
Right.
which is a massive and important enhancement of safety. And then with the large language models, there's a proliferation of sort of specialized assistance, like what Susan just showed us, but specific to parliamentary affairs organizations or to communication shops, as well as public-facing ones that Agriculture Canada has done for farm communities and different programs that are available to them, and things like that we're starting to push out the door now. So a wide variety of applications and a wide variety of areas, but really trying from where I sit to make sure that we're raising the floor and getting everybody moving in that direction and letting the thought leaders continue to push forward.
Fantastic, thanks. And there's obviously, I mean, I know we'll have questions, but a lot we can learn from each other in how because we're kind of on similar stages of our journeys, I think, on this. So really good to have you with us here today, Stephen. David, I'm going to come over to you. So we've heard already quite a bit about what the Prime Minister has announced the week before last. And one of the things he stated was to increase the number of people in tech roles, but also just to be using AI more, that no civil servant should be doing something where AI could be doing that job more efficiently. So I guess my question to you is, what does all this mean for the way we recruit AI talent, the way we develop our own, but also, as you sit in DSIT in that central role, how would you be supporting departments as they're thinking to build all of this capability?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think you and the Prime Minister put their finger on one of the biggest challenges we have in AI adoption at the moment. So when I go and talk to departments and ask them about what's stopping people adopting AI more quickly, I always get the first two items are always the same, and then there's a bunch of other things around privacy and security and the market and all that kind of stuff. The top two are always data and skills. And those are two very different problems. Because with data, to be honest, we have enough data. We just don't necessarily have it in the right place or have it in a form which people can consume confidently and privately and confidentially and put it to work. So we don't lack data, we just haven't put it to work yet. With skills, we absolutely do lack the number of people we need to drive this transformation. To bring that to life in numbers, across the civil service and central government departments, there's about 30,000 digital and data professionals. I think about 16,000 of those are permanent civil servants and about 14,000 or so are contract staff. That's about 1 in 20, about 5% of the civil service. If you listen to the Prime Minister's speech, he set an ambition of 1 in 10, which is 10%, which was great for us to hear because we've said for a long time in DSIT and GDS that we should be aiming for something that's similar to the private sector. And private sector organisations that look like government departments typically have about 10 to 12% of their people as digital and data professionals. In terms of approaches to getting there, that's a non-trivial problem to solve. You can imagine, even if we just double the number of permanent civil servants, that's another 10 to 15,000 people to find. Would actually quite like it, no disrespect to any contractors. We'd like rather more of that contract workforce to be permanent civil servants as well. And then if I amplify it across the whole public sector, there's about 100,000 digital and data professionals, but that's only about 3% of the workforce. So I think I've just described a problem which is in the tens of thousands, if not 100,000s, and I think it's probably a problem that DfE is going to have to start growing us the future digital and data professionals if we're going to get anywhere near that number. We do have a number of approaches. So you may have seen also announced we've launched a new apprenticeship program called Tech Track. I think I'm talking to the first cohort of people coming through Tech Track this Friday. If you have friends and colleagues and students and people who would value a career in digital and career in public sector, I encourage them to apply for the next cohort. So that's one vehicle. The other vehicle, though, is education and training for everybody. I think one of the true things about AI is not just for digital and data professionals. I think that's been one of the most profound things about this wave of change. Is that the reason it's caught everybody's imagination is because it's accessible. You know, to use ChatGPT, you just go to a web page and you type your English-like query in and you get English-like stuff out. Not always very good English, but you get English-like stuff out. So it's incredibly accessible. And that means that AI will be a part of everybody's lives and everybody's jobs. So as we're framing and shaping our education curriculum for civil servants, we're trying to target 3 cohorts. The middle is that digital and data professional cohort. We're also targeting everybody, so to give everybody basic grounded skills, but also leaders. I think that AI presents both an opportunity and a challenge. People are going to need to learn to think differently about how they structure, motivate, incentivize, organize their organizations, and nobody's written the playbook for that yet. So lots of work to do.
Thanks, David. And on the back of what you say, I'm interested in the room. Could you put your hand up if you're not in a digital or data profession? If you're not. Yeah, so we have all professions in the room. And of those of you that just put your hands up, so you're not in a digital or data profession, how many of you would say you nevertheless have basic AI skills?
It's not bad.
So half? Maybe?
Yeah.
Of the people
But also, if I can add a supplementary question to the audience, of those people who aren't in the digital data profession, how many of you would like to be? Because if you would like to be, I've got a whole bunch of vacancies. And fantastic. Then you can find my email address, email me, and I'll hook you up with our training plans, and we'll get you in there.
Thanks. So Morgan, I'm coming over to you. So you have this slightly different perspective. So you sit in the private sector. You work with lots of organisations across the public sector. So a couple of things I want to ask you. One is, people might be worried about the impact this is going to have on them and the workforce. So what assurances would you give them about the way you see the work changing and their work changing? But also, what are you finding in terms of what's working well, and what foundations do departments need to have in place to fully embrace AI?
Yeah, well, first I'll say I'm very sympathetic to anyone who is struggling with the pace of change. I mean, I work in this field every day, and it's hard to stay on top of it. And when I talk to people, I often feel as though there's a sense that AI adoption is inevitable and it's out of our control. But it's not a runaway train. Yeah. I think it will be humans who decide how, when, and why AI is used, and how, when, and why AI won't be used. But humans don't always agree. And I think it's up to the people in this room to be proactive and be conscious to make the right choices to design the future that you want. And I see AI on a spectrum. So at one end of a spectrum, AI can be a tool that effectively lets us automate the boring things, the things you do today already. That could be to do them more quickly or more effectively, but it's doing what you do today. At the other end of a spectrum, AI could be a tool that could actually reimagine what it means for government to play a role in society. And that's really exciting. There is, of course, a lot of similarities in terms of what makes AI adoption successful across organizations. You talk about foundations. And when I see AI going well, I effectively see an organization that has 4 things in place. And that's strategy, delivery confidence, an adoption culture, and governance. So when I talk about strategy, I mean, do you have that vision for how, when, and why AI is used to deliver high-value change as well as just automating things? I think delivery confidence in the context of public sector is as much about what do you buy as a commoditized service, what do you build in-house. But remember, POCs are easy, scaling is hard. So going back to David's point, you'll only be successful if you've got the right infrastructure, the right data foundations, and the right process in place. Talking about adoption culture, this is about how do you embed AI safely and compassionately, put people first. There will be mistrust, there will be misunderstanding, there will be even resistance to AI. So make sure that education and business change are fundamental to your approach here. And finally, governance. Look, the stakes are high in the public sector and people are watching, so governance is critical, and that means governance around ethics. Do you have human agency in the decision-making process? That means legal governance. Are you compliant with laws and regulation? But it also means technical governance. Does your solution do what you think it does? That's absolutely critical. And I'm increasingly seeing people look at environment and sustainability as part of this as well. Every design decision you make will have an impact on the climate and on broader environmental goals as well. So if you get those things right, you're on a path to success.
Great, thanks, Morgan. And it's really interesting, when we used to talk about AI a couple of years ago, the first things that would come up would be the risks around AI. And I think now we tend to start with the benefits that AI can bring. But those issues that you mentioned there around the governance, the ethics, the responsible use of AI is still really important. So we might come on to those when we have that conversation. Thanks. And then Ed, last but by no means least, so if you are from the UK, you will know this. For any international people we have in the room, our health service is always going through lots of reforms, but it's safe to say recently even more reforms to NHS have been announced. How do you see AI playing a role in this kind of ongoing reform process, both looking at your internal processes, but also crucially, and this is where a lot of people do see AI having the benefits, what you deliver to patients?
Sure. So this is still fairly early days for us, and we were talking in the last session about psychological safety, and I've got to admit, I feel quite raw about this right now. But I will share with you where my thinking is up to so far. So I think that's a good way to break it out. There's the internal stuff and there's the external stuff. On the internal things, I've been working in the NHS now for about 12 years, and depending on how you count it, I've gone through 5 or 6 reorganizations, and this is my 3rd time being abolished. So the reason to bring that up is because each of these reforms, each of these changes never happens in a vacuum. There's always a sort of trend, there's always sorts of issues and things that are trying to be resolved through it. The 3 things that come up pretty much every time are 1, duplication, a lack of kind of consistency as to who's responsible for what. 2nd, non-value adding work, too many people marking homework, too many people holding people to account. And 3rd, in the NHS, the performance isn't good, waiting times are high, we're overspending. So each of these 3 sort of facets, which is they're kind of common themes throughout the reforms, have direct AI solutions, or AI can help with each of these in different ways. For the first one, where we've got duplication and lack of consistency and responsibilities, we need to automate a lot more, automate both data flows, but also forecasts, also ways of doing things. That's one huge gold mine, I guess, for us to dig at in the NHS. For the second one, with there being non-value adding work or too much sort of holding to accounts, AI has a huge potential to help us identify where things really are poorly performing versus where there are other constraints, there are other things outside of people's control, and to try to get to that core truth of what we should expect from services in terms of delivery. And then on the third point, in terms of the performance of the NHS is obviously hugely big, hugely complicated, and there are coordination problems everywhere. And coordination is one of these things AI can help us with. It can help us with booking slots for surgeries or appointments in a more efficient manner. It can help us with rostering our staff to meet demand surgeries that we expect. It can help with like the nuts and bolts of how do I get the letter to the patient at the right time with the right information, and all of these areas. All of these areas are under development within the NHS, within NHS England. Those are sort of on the sort of more internal side, and I think one point I'd bring up actually is that these span, what did you call it? Your
Spectrum.
Spectrum, that's the word. They span the spectrum. Some of these are sort of straightforward. There's a process, help the process, and some of these are much more complicated, potentially much more juicy. But let's change the workflow, and think through how we could do it differently with AI. That last one is really, really difficult. We've tried, it's hard to do. The only times it's actually been straightforward to do has been during COVID, where everything was disrupted anyway. So when we're going through these fairly monumental changes in the health service, maybe I need to bear in mind, and we need to bear in mind, so there may be some opportunity in disruption in terms of processes that will change anyway. More importantly for the patients and the public, there's going to be a long-term health plan or 10-year health plan delivered shortly. The government's already been really clear. There are 3 shifts we want to see in healthcare. The first off is from hospitals to the community. The second is from treatment of illness to prevention of illness. And the third is from analog to digital. That last one abounds with AI opportunities, and we have lots of sort of platforms and investments where we can drive more from that, whether it be the federated data platform, the NHS app, various other systems, live systems that we have. But the other two as well, I would point out for huge potential for AI to support, because these are fundamentally questions of identification and then coordination for change. So we need to understand what we need to do to prevent and who should be targeted, and then we need to understand how can we, wrap care around people and have that change happen. Similarly, with the shift to the community, the clinical model in the NHS is incredibly diverse, complex. No one person has their head around all of it, I would suggest, and this is something that AI can come in and help us with.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, we started with Susan from the central government also talking about kind of teachers and then ending with you from the kind of delivery side of things as well, but working back to the central kind of how the Department of Health itself can be changed as well. It's clear from all of you to see that AI has a role to play in all of these areas and potentially huge benefits, both to the service but also to the citizens that we serve. So thank you all of you for those opening remarks. I've got loads of questions, but I'm sure the audience have as well. So I'm going to throw open to the audience. There is a hand up here and a hand at the back. So we'll take those two questions first. Do we have somebody with a mic? If you could keep your hand up when I've said I'll come to you, and then we can see where the mic. There's a gentleman at the back for the next question. Thank you. If you want to start with the first question.
Hello. Thanks for that was a really interesting talk, actually. It's H. Patel from DWP. My question is, to what extent are you concerned about the missing data issue in the AI models that are driving these things? And to what extent do you think the organisations that are providing or underwriting these tools are concerned about and dealing with that issue? And I guess explicitly, I mean the missing data on women and girls. So the Karen Criada Perez argument. Thank you.
Thank you. So great opening question. To what extent are we worried about missing data when it comes to AI? And it's just the gentleman with the blue shirt has got his hand up for the next question at the back. Yeah, David, I'll come to you.
I was shielding. I seem to have volunteered by shielding my eyes to answer a really difficult question. But that's fine. That's fine. I'll try.
Don't move.
I'll try and tackle it because it's a really difficult question. I just wanted to check first if I interpreted the question correctly, which is the AI. The current wave of AI innovation is driven by models typically built by tech companies who have sourced their data in various ways, and in many cases don't actually share full provenance of how they've sourced that data. We know some of it comes from scraping the internet, some of it comes from publicly available data sets, but we also know through quite extensive testing that those data sets aren't fully representative of the world, of everybody in the world, or necessarily everybody in the UK population. To give another example of that I've come across is that I think you mentioned about using AI for translation. English and French reasonably well represented on the internet. English probably more than French. I've spoken to other governments who operate in languages which are less well represented, and their question is, well, how do we get these models to work for us? I don't think there's an easy answer. I think the way I try to address it, though, and this is the way I've seen it addressed in multiple areas, is that to be quite compartmentalised about what job the underlying model does. So increasingly what I'm seeing people doing is they're using the underlying model to do things like basic language processing and reasoning. What is the intent and meaning of this query? And then to anchor the response in a more narrow data set that is more tuned and more representative. That doesn't solve the problem entirely, but it does mean that anything you're using for providing a citizen with guidance or helping a teacher or building a lesson plan comes from a data set which is under our control and which is designed for that particular purpose, and therefore we can take the effort to make sure that that is suitably representative of the people we are attempting to serve. That's not a perfect answer, because at the moment this is by far from a perfected technology, but it is a way to make practical use of the technology which the market has given us so far.
Thanks. Susan, Susan and then Morgan, I'll bring you in.
I just wanted to endorse that point about really thinking about what the purpose your AI agent is serving, and how do you deploy the right kind of data for the right kind of purpose. And that's exactly the thinking that's behind our education content store, which is about saying we want not just in government, but in the ecosystem of those who develop AI and ed tech, we want people to be able to point at some kind of really reputable sources for that kind of deployable data set, and to try and use the generic for much more for the kind of query interpretation. I think even then you have to watch out for the missing data. Caroline Criollo Perez's book is excellent, quite depressing. We also have to remember those biases exist in lots of the other ways we make decisions. So there's always a bit of a risk of status quo bias, of assuming that if you can see something wrong with something new you might do, you should stick with the old, and we should keep testing ourselves whether those old versions of things contain similar bias. When I was working in HMCTS, we did quite a lot of work on use of digital and data in justice systems, where people were very worried, completely understandably, about algorithmic forms of bias, but you always just had to test yourself against the extent to which there was bias in face-to-face justice systems as well. And then the final thing, I think there's something really interesting about systems that try and effectively ask AI agents to play different roles or to challenge each other. So I had a colleague who was having a demo of some AI work that's been done on audit, where they've effectively trained the AI to take a set of different personas, to ask a set of different questions from different perspectives through the audit, and then to interact with each other. So essentially the AI agents generate a series of questions and bounce off each other to test the things that they might not otherwise have thought about. And I think we should really think about that kind of, can you effectively use the AI to test and challenge itself on areas that it might otherwise miss or omit.
Thanks. Morgan, you're going to come in. And then we have got another question. I know we've got gentlemen at the back, and then we've got questions down here. Thanks.
I think it's worth looking at this in the long term as well. And the key to overcoming this challenge is around awareness. So first of all, thank you for asking that question. I think it's really important that we keep challenging that question. We keep bringing it up in forums like this. As I said earlier, humans make the decisions around how, when and why AI is used. And we need to make sure that the next iteration, the next generation of models are more inclusive. We get to decide that as humanity, right? But only if we are raising that awareness around those topics that we see. And anyone who says their model doesn't have any risk or they've mitigated the risk is being disingenuous. It does exist. Of course it does, because humans are biased. You overcome it in the short term, as we've heard, through governance, okay? And it's all about risk appetite, as David said. And having the right governance in place will help you at least monitor, measure, and be able to articulate the risk and the bias that's in there so you can make decisions in an appropriate way.
Thanks, Morgan. Gentleman at the back, and then could we bring the mic down here? We've got two at the front here. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to touch on the point that Morgan made around governance. So I've recently been involved in a trial for Copilot within the Home Office. Really like it. It's a really useful tool, but we're already limiting the use of it because we've only got access to the web tool. We can't use the application. We can only upload file sizes of 1 gigabyte, which is pretty much nothing. How do we get around those governance? I'm going to use the word blockers. It's going to be a bit controversial, but I think it's there, from policy, from legal, or from just general apathy around the use of AI when it can improve, certainly in my area, operational performance.
Okay, so yeah, Stephen. So David, then Stephen on this one.
Yeah. So thanks for the question. I think my reflection would be this technology is new. A lot of, maybe if I take a step back, and say something maybe controversial. I see in every organisation I've ever worked for, good governance and bad governance. Well, I describe the characteristics of good governance are reason-structured decision-making that is highly contextualised to the problem that's trying to be solved and invokes thought rather than just process. And bad governance tends to be, there's a rule, let's just follow the rule without necessarily a huge amount of thought. And I'm not saying that anybody who's made decisions in your context is doing bad governance, but I see that everywhere. Again, not just in the public sector, but everywhere. I think the key is to try and push things towards the good governance side as much as possible. I'll offer some help. So in Government Digital Service, we published an AI playbook Doesn't attempt to be policy, it's deliberately guidance rather than policy. It's about 100 pages long now, I think is the latest version. So I wouldn't necessarily encourage you to read every single page of it. But the idea is there to try and provoke as much good, thoughtful governance as possible. And a lot of that is really to say, here's a thing we've checked out and it's okay. It's still up to individual departments whether to follow that guidance or not. But we can say from the centre, actually, here's a thing you can be less worried about. So the thing I'll offer is that to you and anybody else who's feeling, if you're bumping into what you think are unreasonable blockers, part of our job in the centre is provide guidance which is not just rules, it's really practical how-to. And if you'd like us to put something about that in our next version, please come and see me and we'll do our best.
Thanks. Stephen, was this part of the strategy as well to try and...
Yeah, and I like what David said about it. I think maybe a slightly different angle I would take on it would be to echo what the Permanent Secretary from DSET said this morning around some of the traditional groups that we have around these tools. I think those range from very senior level public servants who have tended, at least in the Canadian system, but I think probably in the UK as well, who have come up sort of a policy generalist stream where they are a little bit hesitant and maybe a little bit nervous about adoption here, and they're not always, speaking as one of them, feeling very well positioned to actually get their arms around understanding what's happening inside the algorithm or underlying data set. So there's a concern that sort of puts them in a very risk-averse mode, and also I think a little bit of intimidation in terms of not maybe understanding the ones and zeros as much as they feel like they should. At the same time, again, speaking on the Canadian side, we have a I don't mean this as negatively as it sounds, but there is, within our technology stream, there are some vested interests as well, in terms of folks who have traditionally come up that road to become CIOs and CTOs, who are have maybe only been in public sector, have maybe been very much focused on procurement and project management. And they will drive us towards known tools, which is, I would suggest, probably why you've got Copilot in the Microsoft suite as opposed to some of the other tools that are out there. The only solution to that, I think, is time, and I do think the data and digital community tends to be more diverse and a little more slightly different sets of experience and a little more in touch with some of the operational elements of our departments. So bringing those folks in so they can challenge, and also to build some of the bespoke tools, to go back to the earlier question as well, that are tools that we know are suited for our purposes on data sets that we control. I think we'll start to get around some of those things. But we're in exactly the same place in terms of the initial steps being taken, particularly, I would say, in some of the departments that have a bit of a security nexus.
Thanks, Stephen. We've got 2 questions here. I'm going to take both those questions, then I'm going to look over here for the next question. So 2 here. Thanks.
Okay. Hi. My name is Ksenia. I am a research lead in the app, AI-enabled app, gov.uk. One question I have for you, or I would love to hear your perspective on, a lot of the problems we see for users and citizens are pretty holistic, like as a result of the way that the system is structured. And if you take it like at a high level, it's almost like we are sending users down the cost center path, right? So everything is cost center based. And when we're trying to approach like higher order holistic problems, immediately we hit this. I mean, before we talk about operational, whether we have data or not, policy, it's very, very difficult not to fall into an optimization trap into the current cost centers, right? You know exactly what I'm talking about. And I wonder, like, how do you feel we can combat this long term? Is it by creating very low-level value, like AI applications that work and build that momentum from the bottom up, from specific to more general? Or is it by breaking something bigger?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just conscious that I'm not sure everyone can hear your questions. I'm just going to repeat it, and I might, if I'm not doing it justice, let me know. But so you're from the gov.uk app team, and I think you're talking about how can we avoid the risk that the approach is a very kind of general, holistic one, that we force people down traditional routes when they come through the app. Should we, so essentially I'm going to say, are we digitalizing a bad process when we could be fundamentally reforming everything? Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of the first question. And then the lady next to you. Thanks for that question. Lady next to you. you put your hand up? Yeah, just two along. Thanks.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Shruti Kohli. I'm heading the DWP Innovation Lab in AI function. So as all of you, we have also embarked in the journey of test and learn from last year and next phase of scaling, and this year we are doing. In the lab, while we were investigating these large language models, we could really understand, there could be some future sustainability issues. So we started exploring at small language models. So just wanted to understand that, while we are all upskilling ourselves and trying to make best use of AI, are we thinking of having those sustainability frameworks so that we could really future-proof these technology for the public sector? Thank you.
Thank you. So two questions. One, are we digitalizing or are we properly reforming? And then the second question, as we upskill our kind of workforces, are we future-proofing that program of upskilling? Thank you. And then there's a lady over here for the next question. If we get the mic, if you keep your hand up, thanks. Okay, who would like to answer? Ed, I'm going to come to you. One or both. But I love
Should have volunteered for someone else before.
Well, I love this question of, are we actually doing the transformation we need?
Yeah. So I think we've got a similar challenge in the NHS at a smaller scale in terms of that shift I mentioned, moving from hospitals to the community, where we've got huge multi-million, billion-pound providers in a sector with a particular operating model. And the vision is something entirely different, which is much more integrated care and moving people from one place to another, or moving the care from one place to another. I would have thought you've got to kind of skin the cat from both angles. There has to be the top-down permission to change things. That has to be really clear, and that's not just the Prime Minister or Secretary of State saying it. That has to filter down. But then also, I think, from much smaller scale issues of integration and silos that I've worked through, is that at more of the grassroots, or at much more junior levels, people are always incentivized into what's around them in terms of their jobs. And you are paid by a cost center. We're all paid by a cost center. And that's inherently incentivizing us in one way. And that's the way it will work. We're not going to move away from that. Some of the counters to that, or some of the solutions, are probably stuff like events like this, where you're meeting other people and understanding the pressures or the wider contributions we can each make to some of these big missions of government. And I think over the course of moving to work from home, this has become harder and harder, and people just speak with their own team more and more. I think I see that definitely in my directorate. Forcing people to get out and meet, which used to always be sort of a byproduct of being at work and going to the kitchen or whatever, is more valuable than it was before, because it's happening less. So coming to events like this and setting these events up such that you're understanding what one another are doing is one way to work that bottom-up aspect, as well as the top-down that we see from the government.
Thanks. Susan, I'm going to ask, do you think the mission approach might help with this, breaking down these kind of traditional ways of doing things?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think, so we lead the Opportunity Mission in DFE, and we're a massive contributor to the Growth Mission, and actually we contribute to all the missions, because without skills, you haven't got any of it. And I think that principle of setting some big, hairy goals and then asking people to kind of coalesce around them is definitely kind of a contributor. I do think there's a place here for kind of, good old-fashioned user research and making sure you understand what the kind of... So I always sort of slightly channel Chris Wormold in these moments. He has a speech he does, which some of you might have heard, about how sometimes silos are good. So in the nicest possible way, if I break my leg, I don't want a multi-agency team. I want a really good orthopedic surgeon, and I'd quite like him to do an operation he's done 150 times before, like exactly the same. And so working out when the cost centre is doing something helpful for the citizen and when it's getting in the way of what they want. Because there are other moments where you really do want a much more kind of holistic approach. I also think the technology itself has got the potential to help us with this. So I think increasingly the future may be much more of a kind of effectively coordinated patchwork of tools that have got some bespoke and some generalized elements with a layer on top of them that help you get to the right tool for the right purpose. So it might feel very seamless to you as a citizen, but the construction of some of those things to optimize for the particular tasks they're doing might feel a bit more cost-centery. So I think the heart of this is back to purpose, which is where I started, which is we don't do tech because we like tech. We do tech because it works better for people. And keeping coming back to that question of kind of what's the fundamental purpose? Have we understood this from the citizen's perspective? Have we really looked at this through the eyes of the person at the other end of this telescope? And both, that, by the way, one of the things I think about all the time is both their long-term interest and their short-term interest, which is really important when you're educating children. So if we just go for short-term interest, we might give out a lot of ice cream. But we have to think about long-term kind of interest and happiness as well. But if you can put that kind of citizen short-term and long-term interest at the heart of your thinking and decision-making, I think you can do quite a good job of working out when the cost centres and silos might be helpfully funneling you towards something suitably specialised, and when they might be getting in the way of you creating something better joined up.
Thanks. Just very quick, does anyone want to come in on the, are we sure we're future-proofing our skills programme?
So maybe if I go, because I think the question was also about sustainability as well as about skills. I keep reminding myself that this current wave of AI innovation is about 2 years old.
Yeah.
So we are in the stage where we have a bunch of unanswered questions. I think those unanswered questions include, will advances in both silicon, semiconductor and model technology just improve efficiency? I think there are signs that it will. At the moment, though, that is being offset by a tendency to build ever larger and more powerful models. And I think the other unanswered question, to your point about small language models, is do those ever larger models actually deliver more incremental value or exponential value that offsets their exponential cost and environmental impact? And I think that's a genuine question mark at the moment. I think at the moment the market tends towards the let's have more models, please, because that's how companies get valued. I think we will go through a period of maturity. Everything goes through its normal hype cycle, and in that period, both those questions will be answered. And my instinct is, I always hesitate to predict the future, is that we will end up with a collection of models which we can fit to needs, both user needs and also cost and environmental needs, that will be more efficient. But we've probably got a couple of cycles of disruption to go through. The other thing I would give a plug for, I would commend that there's great work being done by DEFRA, not just on AI sustainability, but general technology sustainability. They do have a framework which is helping us to measure the energy and carbon footprint of our technology use across government. And I'm keen to help them help us as much as we can to get it right.
Can I just jump on that for 30 seconds to say, in our system, one of the conversations I have constantly with the CTO and the Canadian government is about application hosting strategies and cloud, and how we're actually going to take this, have more digitally savvy CFOs at the table and more sort of financially savvy CIOs to make sure that we're making decisions that we're actually going to be able to afford into the future. Because there's certainly been, in our system, a couple of notable missteps that have generated much larger costs than we had expected. So there's an element of that we have to sort through on the sustainability side as well.
Thanks, Stephen. And I'm looking at the clock ticking down. I think I promised one last question here, so we'll have to be really quick with our answers. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all your questions. Please hold them for other sessions. They'll be relevant in many of the other sessions. Thanks.
Hi, Michelle Wilson-Hill from Cabinet Office. I'm coming at this from somebody who is really not good at AI, but I'm a people person. And my son is currently at university studying in IT, and about 60% of their reports are being scanned for AI involvement in the writing of reports. We're also in recruitment seeing a larger number of applications written by AI. So how do we protect ourselves with this massive recruitment that we're going to need to do for digital people, that we're not getting AI people applying using AI who got their degree using AI? So are we having AI generating all this stuff that we're then going to try and use people with that AI knowledge to write new stuff? So is the AI really coming to the soul of everything, and we're losing the people out of it, and possibly losing some of the innovation that would come from people who haven't been AI trained but actually know the work?
There is so much in this question. I wish we had another 10 minutes. But essentially, does it matter if people are using AI to create applications, for example? Are we going to lose skills if more and more people are using AI? And is there something meta in kind of we're bringing in people who have used AI who then go on to do AI, and therefore we lose kind of the human element? I'm afraid you've got about 20 seconds each. I'm going to ask Morgan. I'll come to you first.
I think the great irony is the more we embed AI into our services and our outcomes, the more it frees up time for humans to focus on the human things, so engaging, empathizing, treating people as people, not just cases. That is actually really exciting for me. And I think if you don't have the right tools available, there will be a whole generation coming into the workforce who are just used to creating content for free, and they will go in other places. So I think we've got to be ahead of the game, and the civil service has got to be investing in those tools now.
Stephen.
Yeah. Look, I don't have an answer, certainly not in the time we've got, but I would say it's exactly the right question to be asking as we go forward here. I think that there is a risk as AI tools proliferate, and we're seeing it already across the internet. As you get AI-driven results, the incentives for content creators that are feeding those AI-driven results are actually being reduced. So there is a diminishing returns piece to this that we have to keep an eye on and think about whether or not the AI is actually going to eat itself somewhere down the road.
Ed.
So I'd say I think it depends what you want the role, what to get out of the person in the role. Using AI probably will be regarded more and more as a skill in itself, and if that's the post, then that's fine. I also think it's probably not an unfair challenge to us as recruiters. Like, part of the reason it's quite easy to subvert the recruitment process is because we probably need to put a bit more thought into it.
Mm. David, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, my really quick thought are, even in an AI world, or maybe especially in an AI world, honesty and originality still matter. So I'd say I don't really care if someone uses an AI tool in order to help them refine or develop or express themselves. What I care about is if they're learning, they're actually taking the trouble to learn, and if they're describing their career, they're actually describing their career honestly. I don't think the technology tool does anything to undermine the value we place on those virtues.
And Susan, the last word. I mean, I guess, as we mentioned, kids are going to be using this, right?
Yes, but I think, again, back to purpose. What is the purpose of asking a young person to write an essay? Is it because you want a really lovely essay? Not usually. It's because you want to develop their brain and the way they think. And so if you're letting them use AI to write the essay and that's diminishing the extent to which they're using their brain and thinking, then you've got it wrong. I think one of the surprising consequences of the AI revolution is that the on-paper handwritten exam in a locked room is probably here to stay for quite a bit longer, because it allows you to make sure you're applying the right things to the product, and the product is the development of your thinking. A really knowledgeable, insightful, thoughtful person using AI is going to give a better result than the same person than someone using the same AI who hasn't had that level of knowledge and brain development. So when your kids say to you, why do I need to learn all this stuff? I can look it up on the internet. You say, no, you're not learning it so that you can spew it out. You're learning it because of what it does to your brain that makes it work better, process better, understand better, and affect everything else you do. Public service message. And I think it comes back to the point about, like, we need to work out what we're recruiting for. And if you want to recruit for the best possible person when AI assisted, allow them to AI assist and require them to say what they did. If you want to test for some skills that are independent of that, then you need to devise some mechanisms that do that. And again, it's back to the point about we've got agency and we've got control. People in this room have got more ability to influence the way this technology is going to develop and be used in the UK than almost any other similarly sized room full of people, I suggest. And so there's something for us about, there's massive opportunity here, but if we're going to get the best out of it, we've got to do it intentionally and thoughtfully and not check in our brains when we use AI. It's an enhancement, not a replacement.
I love that. What a great way to end, and a brilliant last question. So I think lots of potential, but it has to kind of collectively and individually make us better.
Yeah.
We're using this technology. Thank you so much. Please join me in a warm round of applause for our fantastic panel. We are getting back on timing, so we are still going to allow you a good 5-10 minutes to get to your next session. In here, we're going to be talking about digital credentials with a really great international panel. On the Accelerate stage, we've got Unleashing Ideas, and on the Transform stage, more on AI. If you want to follow on, there's a masterclass on AI. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.